What's up guys, it's MTG Matt for you, back with another video, and today we're going to be discussing, in my opinion, the top new cards from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that are going to impact the current top meta decks that we have in Standard. So obviously, every new expansion brings about completely new decks with completely new cards, but I think it's very interesting to look at the top meta decks we have right now in Standard and ask yourself the question, well, which of the new cards from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty are going to impact those archetypes, or is it going to be an impact at all? So what we're gonna do is go through the top meta decks right now. I've picked Mono Green, Mono White, ORZHOV Control, NAYA Humans, and BOROS Aggro. I'm fully aware that there are also other decently performed decks, right? But these are the best decks out there. So the 5 top meta decks, and I was looking through those decks and, you know, seeing whether some new cards from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty would impact them. So with that being said, and without further ado, let's start off with Mono Green. And we're going through here by mana value to see if there are any cards that might have an impact on these top meta guys. So we start with Mono Green here at the 1 mana value. And there are different versions of Mono Green, obviously. Some of them play Snakeskin Veil, some of them don't. But for those versions that do play Snakeskin Veil, I do think that Snakeskin Veil could be replaced by Tamiyo Safekeeping. So Tamiyo Safekeeping is the exact same mana cost. It's also 1 green, it's also an instant, and it says target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You gain 2 life. Now, I do think Tamiyo Safekeeping is superior for several reasons. First of all, let's talk about what is worse about Safekeeping. Well, what's worse is that it does not buff the permanent you target or the creature you target, right? Because the creature does not receive a 1/1 counter. So that's the downside of Tamiyo Safekeeping. But apart from that, I think Tamiyo Safekeeping is better in every regard. First of all, this also gives you hexproof, right? Just as Snakeskin Veil does, so it protects your creature from single target removal. But it also gives indestructible, which means you can, with Tamiyo Safekeeping, you can protect your creatures from, or one of your creatures, from a board wipe, which green currently doesn't have a way to do, right? The only way green stays on the board after a board wipe is with permanents that are not affected by a board wipe, such as an AGGRO Chariot or a Red and 7. Furthermore, the indestructible part also gives you the option to use it as a combat trick. When you're up against other creature-based decks, you can give your creature indestructible if your opponent wants to block it, right? Or if you're blocking with it. In this way, you can get favorable trades. Also, you gain 2 life, and if you're in these matchups against other aggressive decks, this 2 life might be relevant to, you know, stay alive, and maybe you being the one deck that actually comes through with the last bit of damage, and otherwise you might have died without the 2 life. And speaking of, you know, AGGRO Chariot and Red and 7, Tamiyo Safekeeping actually lets you target any permanent, not only creatures, which means that with Tamiyo Safekeeping, you can, for example, protect your AGGRO Chariot from artifact removal. And there's possibly quite going to be a lot more artifact removal in the upcoming meta because of ORZHOV, the new legendary Greenland. So having the option to also just protect your AGGRO Chariot or even your Ren and 7 from Planeswalker removal is huge. And that's why I think that Tamiyo Safekeeping is just straight up the better option here, and it's going to replace Snakeskin Veil. Next up, we are in a 5 mana value slot. By the way, all the mana values I don't cover. I assume there won't be any changes, or I didn't find any cards that would replace the current cards those decks have. So we're talking about 5 mana value here in Mono Green, where depending on the version you run, you will have a Red and 7 or an Unnatural Growth. Unnatural Growth is the more aggressive version, right? And Red and 7 is the version that synergizes better with AGGRO Chariot, because AGGRO Chariot can double up those tokens. And speaking of doubling up tokens, I think in a 5 mana slot, green has 2 decent new options. One is Invoke the Ancients, right, which gives you 2 4/5 Spirit Creature tokens, and you can give them Vigilance, Reach, and or Trample. And I do think Trample is really relevant, right, to come through with damage, but also if you're up against other creature-based decks that, for example, run a Goldspan Dragon, sometimes you're on a clock and having the option to give these Ancients, these creature tokens, Reach can actually be relevant, especially because they've got 5 toughness, so they can actually block a Goldspan Dragon and they will survive, right? That's where NA7 is also so good, because the tokens from NA7 also have Reach. And obviously, Esika's Chariot can double up those Ancient tokens, right? Getting 4 or 5 tokens. It's obviously not as good as getting the NA7 token. However, you do get 2 tokens right away, so you know, in contrast to NA7, this is the more aggressive game plan that tries to close out the game faster. And then also you get Kura the Mono Sky, which is the green Dragon Spirit. For 5 mana, you get a 4/4 Flying Death Toucher, and then as a dice triggers, you can search library for up to 3 land cards, which I think you will probably never pick in a mono green deck. But the second mode is interesting because you create an XX green spirit creature token where X is the number of lands you control. So you get a token similar to that one of Red and 7, right? But first of all, the token does not grow when you play more lands. It just counts the number of lands you have when Kura dies, so that's a big difference. But the difference here is, well, if you play Red and 7, you get a token and a Planeswalker, right? And with Kura, you get a 4/4 flyer right away, and if your opponent, you know, snipes it, you also get a token. So I don't think these new cards are strictly better than the options Mono Green does currently have in 5 mana value, but I do think that it's definitely worth experimenting there and see, you know, if these new options will make the deck better. And lastly, we come to the land slots. So Mono Green is still a deck that runs Snowlands because of Blizzard Brawl, but I do think 2 copies of BOROS Who Endures will make it into the deck because this land is just really, really good. It still comes into play untapped, and you know, since Faceless Haven got banned, sure, Blizzard Brawl is a great card, but you know, the deck is way less dependent on having snow mana. So I think 2 copies of BOROS Who Endures will just be fine to deal with any artifacts, enchantments, or non-basic lands your opponents will have. So for me, that's really almost like a non-brainer. So that's it for Mono Green. Some new additions this deck might benefit from. Next up, we take a look at Mono White, and we start off with the 2 mana value slot. So if we look at 2 mana value and what White currently runs, we have Intrepid Adversary, Luminarch Aspirant, Thalia, and Sungold Sentinel. All cards which give you continuous value, right? Intrepid Adversary gives you a way to spend your mana later in the game, gives Anthem effect. Luminarch Aspirant buffs your board all the time. Sungold Sentinel can exile stuff from your opponent's graveyard. And obviously Thalia makes non-creature spells cost more. And so for me the question is, there is this new card Line Sash, which is in the 2 mana slot for Mono White, which can exile cards from graveyards and grow, sort of like a Scavenging Ooze, right? But unlike Scavenging Ooze, it comes in as a 1/1 and not as a 2/2, so that's a big downside. But the upside of Line Sash is that while you can reconfigure it for just 2 mana to attach it to a creature you control, such as, let's say, an Elite Spellbinder that has flying, right? And you know, this is just a creature that gives Mono White the option to later in the game just use their mana and make this really big. And then if you have a flyer, you can attach this to this. So again, I think this is the kind of card, Line Sash, that in no way will definitely replace one of these cards, but I do think it's worthy of experimentation. And probably if I look at the 4 cards on the left here, the card that is most likely to be replaced is maybe Sungold Sentinel. But yeah, I think you should definitely experiment with Line Sash. It seems like a decent card. Next up, we got a 4 mana value slot for Mono White, where Mono White currently only runs a Legion Angel, which, you know, gives you access potentially to 4 4/3 flyers without having to actually put them into your deck, which is really, really good, right? And this here for me is a question mark. I think the Wandering Emperor might fit into a mono white deck, right? Because in mono white, or just in general in this meta, you're always looking for, you know, cards that give you continuous value, right? And the Wandering Emperor can, just like Illuminate Aspirant, put 1/1 counters on creatures you control every turn. But then also, if you're up against a creature-heavy deck, like, such as mono green, the -2 could come in really handy. You know, escalating stuff like an Old Growth Troll could be real powerful. Or if you've got nothing else to do, with 4 mana you can just flash this in and create a 2/2 soldier. And I do see that the Wandering Emperor could replace something like a Legion Angel. It's obviously less aggressive than Legion Angel, right? Because Legion Angel has 4 power immediately, comes in as a flyer. But I do think the Wandering Emperor might have a shot to make it into the deck. And then lastly, lands. Mono White doesn't run Snowlands anymore. It doesn't need to because Faces Haven got banned. So I do think like 3 copies of a Ganjo, Seed of the Emperor, could make into a deck. It's debatable if 3 copies is too much, because it is a legendary land, and you do want to hit your land drops, right? But it always comes into play untapped. So I think 3 copies is more or less a safe bet, and it can take out, you know, blockers for you. Also, mono white with Thalia, for example, has with Thalia and Raiden naturally has legendary creatures in a deck, which makes the channel ability a lot cheaper. So that's really cool. And yeah, I'm pretty sure, I think this must go into the deck, right? Just makes it strictly better. And next up, we're looking at ORZHOV Control. And ORZHOV Control has a lot of new cards that might make it to the deck. We're starting at 1 mana value. And I'm just showing the new card Dockside Chef here without, you know, the 1 mana value cards that are actually in ORZHOV Control, which currently is really only Shambling Gas, but some versions also might run iTwitch. You know, Dockside Chef has the exact same ability as, what's it called? You know, the 3 mana mono black dude that gives you treasure and has the exact same ability. And Dockside Chef is only 1 mana, right? It doesn't give you treasure, but it's only 1 mana. And if you think about it, if you play this for 3 mana, you can play this for 1 mana, pay 2 immediately, draw a card. And I do think that, like, let's say 2 copies of this could make it into the ORZHOV Control token deck, right? Because you have so many tokens all the time, and this can simply give you an option for extra card draw. I do think that that's a possibility. And also there's an enchantment creature which might be relevant if you put in some of the other cards you're gonna see in just a second. So I think Dockside Chef is something to consider. And speaking of wanting enchantments on the battlefield, so we're at 2 mana value here, where ORZHOV Control runs Rite of Oblivion and Vanishing Verse, 2 very efficient removal spells, right? And there's this new 2 mana removal spell in Vanishing Slash, which destroys up to 1 target artifact, enchantment, or tapped creature. And then if you control an artifact and an enchantment, create a 2/2 Wise Samurai creature token with Vigilance. So ORZHOV Control is, just by accident, a deck that naturally has artifacts and enchantments in it. So the enchantments are Wedding Ceremony, or like Wedding Invitation, right? And the artifacts is the Edgar Marcon's Coffin, right? And occasionally treasure tokens. So it's not unreasonable to say that you quite consistently you might get a 2/2 token out of Banishing Slash while removing some stuff from your opponent. And you know, 2-for-1s is what I found in this meta is what you're really looking for. You're really looking for cards that give you more than 1-for-1 trades or 1-for-1 value. And Vanishing Slash is such a card. Now, whether it's better than Rite of Oblivion and Vanishing Verse, I doubt it. That's why I put a question mark in here. But again, I think it's definitely a card worth experimenting with, and, you know, just see how it feels and what it does for a deck, right? I mean, for 2 mana, getting rid of something and getting a 2/2 token with Vigilance that, you know, gets buffed up by your anthems, I think that could be really cool, and, you know, it justifies some experimentation. Next up, we are in the 3 mana value slot. So currently, ORZHOV Control at the 3 mana slot runs Wedding Announcement, which is a key part of the deck. Gives you tokens and anthems. And Fell Stingers, which gives you a really nice creature and provides you with some card draw. And there are some, 2 new cards that I would consider for ORZHOV Control. The first one is completely janky. I'm certain it's not good, but it's certainly going to be fun to experiment with, which is Mirror Box, right? Which removes the legend rule from the permanency control. And ORZHOV Control naturally just runs a lot of planeswalkers. So it could be really fun to have a Mirror Box out and then, I don't know, have 2 lows at the same time on the board. That could be super, super interesting. But that's really just for jank. But what's not for jank is possibly Soul Transfer, 3 mana sorcery, which says choose one. If you control an artifact and an enchantment as you cast a spell, you may choose both. So again, this deck naturally has artifacts and enchantments, and if you get both modes, I think this is a really good card. You exile target creature or planeswalker, and you return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So ORZHOV Control has a lot of planeswalkers. They will be in your graveyard, right? You already have synergies with your graveyard because of Blood on Snow. And Soul Transfer gives you an option to, grab those planeswalkers from your graveyard and put it back into your hand, while also removing something from your opponent, and you even exile it. So I think Soul Transfer could be an excellent addition to this deck. The question will be, does ORZHOV Control need it, or doesn't it already have enough removal in the form of Rite of Oblivion and Vanishing Verse? Could certainly be the case. Again, you should experiment with it, but I do think Soul Transfer, it's a 2-for-1, right? If played right, it removes something from your opponent and you get a card. It's just a great value. So Soul Transfer could be a real player in ORZHOV Control. Next up, we got the 4 mana value slot, which is currently occupied by Sorin the Mirthless and Edgar Charmed Groom, also 2 key components of the deck. And I think the Wandering Emperor won't replace any of those cards, but I do think that, at least as a one-off, you could add the Wandering Emperor to the deck and maybe cut something else, or I don't know, cut 1 copy of Edgar, something like that, right? You can always experiment with the numbers, but if you look at ORZHOV Control, it wants to make tokens, right? So the Wandering Emperor gives you tokens. And you also always have tokens, so you always have a creature lying around to put 1/1 counters on, make it bigger, and put the pressure on. And on top of that, what I found when playing ORZHOV Control was that ORZHOV Control can be overrun in the early game, right? By stuff like Mono Green, for example. So having the option of the Wandering Emperor to flash it in, exile a Old Growth Troll from your opponent while gaining 2 life seems really good. And on top of that, you leave a Planeswalker behind, which will buff your tokens and even make more tokens down the road. So I think the Wandering Emperor could fit into this deck, at least as a one-off, as like a flexible removal spell. Maybe you want to remove Vanishing Verse or a Rite of Oblivion from a deck to play the Wandering Emperor. I could totally see this being played in there. And finally, we also come to a 5 mana value slot, which is occupied by Lolth and Kaya Inexorable. Obviously, Lolth is an essential part of the deck. Lolth will never be replaced in that regard, but Kaya is debatable. And I think you could maybe replace Kaya with either Ayo, the Dawn Sky, right, which is the white Dragon Spirit. And the reason I think that Ayo can be good in this deck is because of the first mode when it dies. Let's look at the top 7 cards of the library, which is a lot, right? And you can put any number of null permanents with total mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield. And if you look at just like the 4 mana value, right, you can snatch an Edgar with it, you can snatch a Sorin, maybe a Wandering Emperor, or you can even snatch a Wedding Announcement. So the die trigger from Ayo, the Dawn Sky, works really well with this deck. Because of that, it would also naturally synergize really well with Blood on Snow. And then the second option might be Spirit Sister's Call, which I think Spirit Sister's Call by itself you know, might require the building of a whole new deck. But I think maybe it could fit into this deck, right? Because you can maybe, let's say, recycle a Lolth, right? You play a Lolth while your Spirit Sister's Call already out. You play a Lolth, make 2 spiders. At the beginning of your end step, you sacrifice your Lolth that only has 1 loyalty. And then you get another Lolth from your graveyard back onto the battlefield, and you have a fresh new Planeswalker, right? So Spirit Sister's Call, I think, is really experimental and it will fit in some ORZHOV deck, which will probably be different than this ORZHOV control deck, which is focused on tokens. But I do think it's interesting to experiment with it. And finally, when we look at lands, I think Takenuma Abandoned Mire definitely goes into the deck, even though you know, ORZHOV control does play Blood and Snow, so you want to have snow lands, and because of that you need to be aware of the fact that it can be dangerous to put too many non-snow lands into the deck. But Takenuma is just perfect because you can, you know, get Planeswalkers back from your graveyard, so that's fantastic. AGGRO is the same thing, can just act as a removal spell. And then there's Roadside Reliquary, which again, it asks you for this artifact enchantment requirement, and if you have both of them, you can sacrifice it for 2 mana and draw 2 cards on land, which is, you know, it just produces colorless mana, but it also untaps. So I think Roadside Reliquary, I would definitely try it out as a one-off, not more, because then your mana gets screwed, but as a one-off, I think that's a cool option. So that's it for ORZHOV control. Next we got NAYA Humans, and when going through NAYA Humans, I could really only make a case for adding Sokensa and Crucible of Defiance, which is this red new channel land. The reason is, you know, NAYA Humans runs 3 colors, which means that the mana base is already very, how would you say, tightly structured, right? It doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility because you really want to hit your land drops and with the right mana. So I think a single copy or 2 of Sokensa is fine. Maybe a single copy also of ORZHOV, but I specifically added Sokensa because it makes creature tokens for you, and now Humans also naturally has legendary creatures in the deck, which will make this channel ability, in most cases, probably at least 1 cheaper, maybe even 2 cheaper, and then it costs only 2 mana to create 2 tokens at instant speed. And with NAYA Humans, you just want to pressure your opponent all the time, and you also have nice ways with Luminarch Aspirant, Intrepid Adversary, and Raidane, not Raidane, Halan and Lena, to put counters on stuff so those 1/1 spirit tokens won't remain 1/1s for long. So I think this land will be a reasonable addition to the deck. Next we have BOROS AGGRO, where we just look at the free mana value, and the free mana value is occupied by Brutal Cathar, Elite Spellbinder, Raidane, and Angel Fire Ignition. And you know, the only card that I could find where I can imagine it would maybe fit into the deck is Risona Asari Commander. It's a 3/3 with haste, right, in Boros colors. And when these come damage to your player, you put a 1 indestructible counter on it. And then whenever combat damage is dealt to you, remove an indestructible counter from Risona. And I could just imagine Risona as you know, a really annoying creature against control decks. Imagine a control deck being tapped out, and you play this as a haster, right? Can deal combat damage immediately, and then you're left with a 3/3 indestructible creature, and it's just hard for your opponent to deal with that, right? So this for me is still a question mark, because Cathar, Spellbinder, and Raidane are so good. They won't be replaced, so maybe you would replace an Angel Fire Ignition. Maybe, right? Has got the same mana cost. So that's a possible addition to the deck. And concerning lands, you would just add the 2 channel lands, right? Because you don't care at all about snow lands or anything in the BOROS AGGRO deck. So adding these 2 channel lands is a safe bet. And that's it for my analysis on which cards might impact the top meta decks. Hope you guys enjoyed the videos and look forward to new brews as well, right? We're not only going to look at which new cards will impact current decks, but obviously the most fun part about the new expansion is actually building completely new decks, and I'm definitely going to do that. Completely excited about this new expansion. Looks fantastic. So hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I see you guys soon.